talking. Okay. Well, I'm going to borrow a chair. Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning. My name is Beverly White Seals. I'm Director of Workforce Diversity for the hospital and the health system. And today's topic is sexual harassment in the workplace. I've been here at Hopkins in this role for about a year and a half now. I originally came from Howard County as chair of the board of Howard County Hospital. So I've been in the Hopkins system for some time. I was actually, tell you a little bit about myself, born and raised in Washington, D.C., product of the D.C. public school system. And then I went to law school. I'm a lawyer by training. So I'll try not to get too legalese with you on this. But again, I'm a Washington, D.C. native. If anybody has a problem with the fact that I'm a D.C. native, I can provide you with a certified copy of my birth certificate to make sure you feel comfortable that I'm actually a citizen of the United States of America. EEO, diversity, and affirmative action. That's what my office does. Just tell you a little bit about what we do. Equal employment opportunity means treating people without regard to race, color, creed, national origin. Anyone within the hospital or health system who feels that he or she is being discriminated against would file a complaint of discrimination with my office. And we will investigate it thoroughly, issue a decision. Now, sexual harassment actually falls within equal employment opportunity. So we also handle sexual harassment cases. Affirmative action. Affirmative action actually is a requirement for large government contractors, which Hopkins is. So we have written affirmative action plans that deal with the numbers of people, male, female, by race, by national origin. We have to keep track of all those statistics and make sure that we're not underrepresented in any categories based on guidelines from the federal government. Diversity. That's what I do a lot of the time, which is go around the institution explaining to groups what diversity is, how we become a more inclusive environment. Inclusion is how do you get people from all these different backgrounds with all these different belief systems and traditions to work cohesively as a team. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. That's kind of the Bible of civil rights law. It was passed in 1964, and there's actually a picture of President Lyndon Johnson sitting with Martin Luther King passing that statute that said from that point on it was against the law to refuse to give people access to employment, access to housing, access to public accommodations like swimming pools or restrooms or hospitals because of their race, creed, color, national origin, or gender. In addition to overt acts of discrimination, such as I won't hire you because you're Asian, I won't hire you because you're from Italy. In addition to that, the law evolved. So it wasn't just keeping people out of the workplace, it was making them uncomfortable or harassing them in the workplace because of those characteristics. That also became illegal. Anyone here of Irish heritage? No one of Irish heritage? Italian? One Italian? Greek? We'll stick with Irish and Italian. Could be transposed. About 150 years ago, maybe even a little more, there was a potato famine in Ireland, and there were large numbers of Irish who were immigrating to this country. This was in the mid to late 1800s. And because of the influx of new immigrants, you would see signs like this on establishments. No Irish need apply. There were also signs like this that said no Italians need apply. There were signs like this elsewhere in the country that said, no Spanish need apply. But look at the Irish. Can you think of what city you might have seen that sign in? And this would have been the late 1800s. New York, Boston. This particular sign was Boston, but you would have seen similar signs in New York. For Italians, no Italians need apply. Philadelphia. There were a lot of signs like that in Philadelphia. This is a whites-only water fountain. Now, my husband was born in Mississippi, and images like this, whites-only water fountains, whites-only restrooms, were very common in Mississippi when my husband was growing up. I'm originally, like I said, from Washington, D.C., and I saw signs like that as well, but not as often as my husband did. But those of us from the Mid-Atlantic, anyone here from most of you from the Mid-Atlantic, Baltimore, Maryland, places in Maryland, we tended to think that that was mostly the Deep South. This image, whites only water fountain, Baltimore, Maryland, 1947-48, Bethlehem steel. This picture is a historic photo that's now in the Washington National Archives. Whites only, no blacks could drink from this water fountain right here in Baltimore, Maryland. How far was the Bethlehem steel plant from where we are right now? 10 minutes away. 10 minutes away. What is this?
Hanging noose.
Hanging noose. Hanging noose. That's a threat. Once they passed that civil rights statute that prevented companies from denying employment to the Irish, to the Italians, to African Americans, the law, as I said, evolved, and they would no longer let people threaten in the workplace. So even if I hired you, I might make your life so miserable that you wouldn't want to work there. And people would sometimes do that by putting nooses on people's doors. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible period in our history. But I show this particular image because this was 2007. Someone put a noose on the door of a professor at Columbia University in New York City. That is a threat. That's covered under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the court interpretations. Sexual harassment. I've given you kind of the legal foundation for it. Now I'm going to actually have you read out loud the EEOC definition of sexual harassment. Together. Unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature constitutes sexual harassment when 1. Submission to such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of employment. 2. Submission to or rejection of such conduct is issued as the basis of employment decisions. Or 3. Such conduct has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive working environment. That is the definition that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has set forth for sexual harassment in the workplace. And everything else we talk about today is going to trigger back to that definition. At the same time, Johns Hopkins, the Health System Corporation, Johns Hopkins Hospital, Johns Hopkins Health System, and all of the affiliated entities have policies that prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. Johns Hopkins policy, HR policy 501, it sets forth that the workplace must be free of harassment and discrimination, that Hopkins will take any allegation seriously and respond promptly, and if sexual harassment is determined to have occurred, disciplinary action will be taken, up to and including termination. Now, from that definition, there are two forms of sexual harassment. The first one is called quid pro quo, which is Latin. It sort of means this for that. I give you something, you give me something. Under this type of sexual harassment, there is an exchange of an employment benefit by a supervisor in exchange for sexual favors. The second type of sexual harassment, no deal is struck. It's not you give me sex, I give you a promotion, you give me sex, I give you a better shift. It's not that type of harassment. This is the one where there are jokes in the workplace, people are sending each other pornographic emails, may stick posters up on the wall that are sexually explicit, asking people out for dates repeatedly. Those are the things that create a hostile work environment, which is a violation of the federal equal employment opportunity policy and law. It is also a violation of the Hopkins policy. Now, the things that create a hostile work environment, and most often, not always, but most often, these are the cases that I tend to see, are the hostile work environment cases. Use of a lot of profanity can be regarded as sexual harassment. Ethnic slurs, sexual slurs, leering. Does everyone know what leering is? And you know it when you see it. Leering is something that's hard to describe, but anyone who has been on the receiving end of a leer knows what it is. By the way, women can leer as much as men can leer, and it can be as offensive to men as it is to women. Back rubs, hugs. Keep your hands to yourself. That of everything that I say for the rest of this hour, keep your hands to yourself. Don't put your hands on anyone. Sexually explicit cartoons, emails, probably tweets, text messaging. In the workplace, dealing with sexual content is not appropriate. I have friends who sometimes send me suggestive cartoons, or they'll send me jokes, or they'll send me political jokes. I have started to tell my friends, if you want to send me something like that, send it to my home email account. Do not send anything like that on the Hopkins Exchange. Do not tweet with me, if it's personal in nature, on the Hopkins Exchange at all. Two reasons. One, it's against the policy. It's against the internet and the communications policy and the IT policy here at Hopkins to use any of your Hopkins communication devices for that in that manner. Secondly, you get fired. Because whatever is out there on the Hopkins Exchange, I can see it. If I'm called in to do an investigation, I cannot begin to tell you how embarrassed some people become when I'm sitting there reading your sexually suggested emails and communications. That is not your private property. You have no right to privacy when you're using Hopkins equipment. I am not the morality police. So what you do in your home on your equipment is your business. What you do here at Hopkins on our time, on our equipment, is Hopkins' business. I, in fact, have terminated executives when I was in private practice for just doing this. And they would say, oh my God, I can't believe I'm losing my job. I've got kids to support. I can't believe you're going to fire me just for this. How could you do this? Well, I'm not doing anything. Your business outside the workplace is your business. Make it any use of company and Hopkins equipment, Hopkins business. Did you have a question? No. Okay. The alleged conduct, so whatever it is that people are accusing you of doing, must be sufficiently pervasive and severe to create an abusive work environment. That means that if on an isolated occasion you, in the middle of a conversation, make some kind of casual comment, you don't necessarily we'd all lose our jobs. We are not trying to monitor every single word you say. So a solitary, isolated event may not result in your termination, depending on the severity of the event, or the severity of the conduct or the statement. That will determine whether you receive disciplinary action. But again, just be careful what you say. Now, when I started giving this presentation, a couple people said, you can't say anything in the workplace anymore. Everybody's going to get offended. I never know what to say. I used to be able to tell a couple jokes and there was no problem. And to my response to that is really, my mother died at the age of 93. And for 50-something years of my life, I talked to my mother almost every day. Not once did I ever tell her a dirty joke. Not once. When I would go to church growing up, not once did I tell my priest a dirty joke. Not once. I never made an inappropriate comment to either, well, my mother would have. I never, ever did that because I had a filter. I knew where it was appropriate to say things like that and where it was not appropriate. Now, there may be some of you who do go home and tell your mother dirty jokes, but for the most part, I would venture to say that doesn't happen very often. In fact, how many of you would feel comfortable going home, looking at your mother, and calling her by her first name? Raise your hands. Where are the hands? What is it that allows you to figure out that might not be such a good idea? What would your mother's reaction be if you called her by her first name? That was the communication form that my mother would have used. Now, calling her by her first name is one thing. What would your mother or your aunt, whoever the person who raised you, or father, have been if you not only call that person by their first name, but used profanity? What would the reaction have been? In the hospital. Any similar responses without regard to race, color, creed, national origin? You get the sense that most people are, in fact, able to filter their language, filter their comment, depending on with whom you're talking. We don't just go around to anybody making sexually explicit comments. We don't go around calling people very casually by their first name. Well, the same thing applies in the workplace. If it's really important to how you run your life to have sexual jokes and innuendo, do it outside of the workplace. Anyone know who this is? Does she look familiar? With whom is she associated? Clinton. Bill Clinton. This was Paula Jones. Paula Jones's story was She worked as, I think, an assistant in some department within the state of Arkansas. At the time, Bill Clinton was the governor. He supposedly sent his security detail to pick Paula Jones up from her office, bring her to a hotel room where he allegedly exposed himself to her. Her response was, no, don't do that. And then she went back to work. Never saw him again, never heard from him again. The court actually found that was not sexual harassment. He might have been a pig. You might not have wanted him to be, your daughter's husband. You might not have wanted to be married to him. But it wasn't illegal. He got in a lot of legal trouble, but it wasn't because of what he specifically did to Paula Jones. It was an isolated incident. It occurred one time. It was not illegal. It didn't impact her job. She didn't lose any pay. She didn't lose any sleep over it, really. She didn't lose any benefits at work. She went back to work and continued to do her job. This I want just to use as an illustration that everything that is grossly inappropriate is not necessarily illegal. It would, however, undoubtedly get you fired here at Hopkins. It would be against the policies here at Hopkins. Do you know who the person on the left is? Does she look familiar? Anita, who somebody said Anita? Yes, it's Anita Hill. With whom is Anita Hill associated? Clarence Thomas, currently on the Supreme Court of the United States. Anita Hill said, I worked for Clarence Thomas when he was the chairperson, I believe, of the EEOC. And Clarence Thomas used to always tell me dirty jokes. He would show me pornographic images. He asked me out on dates. Never specifically asked her for sex. Never threatened her job. But repeatedly brought the issues of sex into the workplace. Now remember our definitions. There were two types of sexual harassment, quid pro quo and hostile work environment. Which one was this case? Absolutely, perfect. This case probably laid the foundation for most corporate policies about hostile work environment in the workplace. Every company in America started writing a policy after the hearings for Clarence Thomas to become a member of the Supreme Court. The guy on the left, unless you're a lawyer, you have no idea who he is. His name is Joseph Ancala. His case went to the Supreme Court in the 1990s, I believe. And Joseph Ancala worked on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. He was newly married, fairly religious guy, did not enjoy sexual chats and banter and pornographic images in the workplace. And because he was so devoted to his new bride, Joseph Ancala would say to his coworkers, I don't want to hear that stuff. I don't want to be a part of that. It's really offensive to me for you to constantly be talking about sex while I'm stuck here on this oil rig. Now, they're on that oil rig for weeks at a time, and then they go home for a week or two and then go back out to the oil rig. Joseph Ancala got so fed up after complaining to his supervisor, complaining to his manager, and the more he complained, the more he got teased. Joseph Ancala quit his job, went home, hired a lawyer, and sued the company, the oil rig company. Joseph Ancala is now probably a very wealthy man. His case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and he won. And the reason I show Joseph Ancala is because I want to impress upon you that it's not just men sexually harassing women that can result in a finding of sexual harassment. It can also be men bantering back and forth with men that might make other men feel uncomfortable. None of those men were asking Joseph and Kala for sex. They were just teasing him. Oh, we're just having fun. That's just what guys do. You know, it's kind of locker room kind of stuff. Well, in the workplace, it's not always funny. And somebody who may sit and laugh with you today may get mad at you tomorrow. And all of a sudden, all those funny jokes, all those funny emails will come back to haunt you. I could do my whole presentation just on Bill Clinton. Who is this? Monica Lewinsky. Everybody knows Monica Lewinsky's story. Now let's think, remember our definitions. Hostile work environment, quid pro quo. What is this? Monica Lewinsky walks into Bill Clinton's office carrying a pizza box, I think. And when she saw Bill Clinton, she pulled up her skirt and showed her thong underwear. And a relationship began after that. Which is that? Quid pro quo, hostile work environment, or neither? Neither. Who said neither? It's a neither. Talk about consensual. I mean, she was the one initiating it, and he didn't reject it. That was not sexual harassment. Grossly inappropriate, maybe. Maybe it's immoral, unethical. But again, we are not the morality police. Grossly inappropriate. But it was not sexual harassment. Now I'm going to walk through a couple case studies. And these are real-life cases that I worked on as a practicing attorney with my corporate clients. First one is a female manager and a male subordinate. Listen carefully to the story because I'm going to have you help me figure out what type of harassment or not harassment these cases happen to be. The first one is a female manager who had a relationship with a male subordinate. I love you, you love me. He was having problems with his wife, so he started having an affair with his supervisor. Is that sexual harassment? If so, quid pro quo, hostile work environment, or neither? Neither. It's consensual. First word. Remember that first word in our definition? Unwelcome. That was welcome. Keep following the story. He decides after a while of this hot and flaming relationship, well, you know, I went and talked to my priest, and my priest has persuaded me to really try and make a go of my marriage, and my wife is pregnant. So he goes and tells his supervisor, you know, I've got to really stop this relationship. I can't do this anymore. I really want to make up with my wife. My wife is pregnant. I'm consulting with my priest. And she says to him, if you break up with me for her, that's showing bad judgment. And I'm not sure I want to promote someone demonstrating such bad judgment. Hostile, quid pro quo. Absolutely. Well, now I'll tell you how the story ended. I can't make this stuff up. She says, wait a minute, you're still going to go back to her? Well, if you go back to her, I think she should know about our relationship. And then not only should she know, I think your mother-in-law should know. I think your priest should know the real details of the relationship that you and I have. What is that called? That's called crazy. Let's be honest. That is crazy. Now, what would you do? I'm the lawyer. He's in a panic. What do you do with her? What do you do with him? Let's start with him. What do you do with him? Do you discipline him? Do you do nothing with him? Do you counsel him? What do you do with him? Think about the story, consensual, then we get to quid pro quo. What do you do with him? He did nothing wrong. Absolutely. Bad judgment, yes, but nothing against policy. He wasn't harassing anyone, and nothing against the law. Again, we're not morality police about, whatever he was doing against his wife. What do you do with her? What do you do with her? Fire. Probably, that's it for her. Now, let me tell you what happened. She did it. She went to his wife. She went to his neighbors. She went to his priest. And the worst of all, she went to his mother-in-law. She did it. She got fired. I mean, amazing. Sometimes, like I said, you can't make this stuff up. Next, male manager and female staff members. I had a male manager who had a habit, and it really was a habit. I don't think he even thought about it, but every time he spoke with the female members of his staff, you see the buttons on my blouse here? He would stand there and push on the buttons of their blouses. So as I'm telling you what shift you're going to work tonight, I think you ought to know, what your uniform looks like today. And I see you have a pen in your pocket. This is how he would talk to all of the females on his staff. What is that? Absolutely.
Can you repeat the answer, please?
Assault. What was it that you should call doing this to the female members of the staff? What was that? Inappropriate touching. Let me tell you what happened. I asked one of the women, how long has this been going on? 2 years. 2 years. To countless women. And the question I asked, what? Why? I mean, why didn't anybody complain? Why didn't someone complain? Didn't want to lose their job. Didn't want to lose their job. Afraid that the policy would not be followed. Fear of retaliation. It was fear. How did the case come to me? A brand new female staff member who was about 19 years old started working in that department. And the dear manager, I think, got to the second button before she picked up an ashtray. Now, she ended up losing her job too, as they were putting stitches in his head. But that was the last button this man ever pushed. Same sex. This is a really complicated case, so you're going to have to listen to me really carefully on this one, because not everything that is an allegation of harassment can be proved easily. Sometimes it can't be proved at all, and sometimes it may not have happened at all. So I want you to kind of work with me through this one. This case involved a hotel, and it was a 16-year-old boy, brand new employee, first day on the job, never worked anywhere before, shows up at the hotel to work in the food service department. And a couple hours after he shows up to work, what happens? A blizzard. A blizzard happens. None of the guests can leave the hotel, and new guests can't come in. So the food service manager said, listen, everybody's got to stay. And everybody can just double up in the vacant rooms. But what does he do with a 16-year-old boy? So he thought, I'm a little hesitant to put this 16-year-old boy in a hotel room with other young guys. Yeah, and by young, they were in their most were in their 20s, early 30s. Why would that be a good idea or a not good idea? What was he thinking?
I don't know, maybe he liked little boys.
Maybe he liked little boys. That's one option. As a manager, think about being a manager with the responsibility for a 16-year-old.
Trying to be protected.
Be protective. Anything else? I mean, why? What is it about being in a hotel? He's a minor. Also, what do you have in a hotel? Booze and beds. So, thinking about the safety of this little boy, I don't think that was inappropriate. Well, about 2 o'clock in the morning, the little boy gets up, walks home, 2 miles. Blizzard still going on. The next morning, I get a phone call from the parents. The parents say, we're going to sue the company. We're suing the company because this manager sexually approached our son. And it's intolerable, and there was a lot of yelling and screaming on the other end of the phone. I then call in the manager, tell him what the allegation is. He looks like an atom bomb just dropped on his head. I have never in my life touched a child, is what he said. Never. Never thought about it, never did it. I have worked for this company for 20 years. There is not a single blotch within my personnel file to suggest I did anything unprofessional or inappropriate with any person over 20 years. How can you possibly listen to something from somebody who has been on the job 12 hours against me? Now, what do you think? That's all you know at this point. How do you start to investigate? Do you have stronger feelings right now on the manager side or on the boy side? How many are kind of leaning toward the manager? Toward the boy. Okay, for those leaning toward the manager, what things that I've said in the story so far make you lean a little toward the manager?
The fact that his first statement was he had never touched a kid in his own body.
He denied it very directly, very specifically. Anything else?
Track record.
20 years. Track record. Worked there 20 years, no complaints. Anything else for the manager? Boy, it was brand new.
Just the fact that he attempted to protect him.
Right. He had, now whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision, the reason he gave for putting the boy in his room actually sounded reasonable to me. Right or wrong, I mean, he had to put the boy someplace. So does he put him in a room with other 20-year-olds or does he put him in the room with himself? Okay, what about the boy's side? What works on the boy's side?
He walked in a blizzard.
Walked in a blizzard at 2 o'clock in the morning. That got my attention.
Scared him. Something scared him.
There was some reason why he walked home in a blizzard. The manager said he walked home in a blizzard because he thought this is a way to get money. That was what the manager was thinking would be the... Because I said, why would he make this stuff up? Well, when the boy, his mother and father, came to my office, and they're sitting across from me, and I'm not security. I'm a lawyer. He wouldn't make eye contact with me. The boy just looked at his feet. The mother was freaking out, and the father was just sitting kind of quietly in a chair. The boy said nothing. Nothing. Now, put your security hats on, because I didn't have that. What are you thinking now?
He's lying.
He's lying.
Or he's embarrassed.
Or he's embarrassed. Well, we go through the rest of the story, and I'm torn because there's no, I mean, it's his word against the manager's word. There were no videotapes. We did find a tape of the boy leaving the hotel. The guy at the door, the security person, saw him walk out, which, by the way, and I'm not the security people, I thought, you're going to let a 16-year-old walk out in a blizzard at 2 o'clock in the morning and not say anything to anyone? So that was a question I had, which had nothing to do with the case. The end of the story. Oh, how many of you now, based on what I've said, think the manager did it? He did it. He did it. The fact that the boy was not making eye contact with his mother and father sitting there, I knew what 16-year-old boys were like talking about sex, particularly homosexual sex, in front of their mother. I don't know a lot of 16-year-old boys who would have really felt comfortable doing that. 16-year-old boys make up a whole lot of lies. That usually isn't one of them. That would have been a real unusual lie for a 16-year-old boy to make to his mother. Secondly, walking home in a blizzard at 2 o'clock in the morning, like this gentleman said, something inappropriate or frightening or something probably happened, unless this was just some skittish boy and we didn't know much about him. It turned out the proof came in an unusual way. The boy said the manager, this was what he told his mother, the manager sat next to him on the bed, put his hand on the boy's thigh, and told the boy, I am a very important person in this establishment. If you are nice to me, then I can make your life here better. In fact, I can give you more shifts, and the more shifts you work, the more money you make. And I make a lot of money. Now, what kind of harassment, if that's true? Quid pro quo. Wow, that's a pretty direct one. And the boy said to his mother, the manager showed me a copy of his pay stub, and he made $1,392.43. Case closed. There is no way that boy would have known the exact amount of money on the pay stub. After the manager, what should you do with the manager? I suggested to the parents, I didn't want to say, because I'm the lawyer representing the company, you better go to the police as fast as your legs can travel. But I suggested that they could do anything that they thought was appropriate. I hope they did go to the police. But we fired the manager, and about 6 months later, he called me on the phone and admitted he did it. Said he was in therapy and getting help and, a whole lot of other stuff. He did it. He did it. So even though there are cases where it's one person's word against another, where there are no videotapes or monitors going on to track what was done, a careful, thorough, thoughtful investigation can uncover what really happened. As in most crimes, the criminal can't think of everything. How many times have you been able to resolve something that on its face kind of seemed, I don't know whether it's this way or that way. But carefully, methodically looking into and investigating a situation, it's amazing how often the truth will come out. Non-employees. under the policy as well as under the EEOC guidelines, we are responsible, you are responsible as representatives of Hopkins for making sure that non-employees do not sexually harass Hopkins employees. We are responsible for assuring that non-employees do not sexually harass you. Who might a non-employee be? Visitors, customers, vendors. The guy who brings the water, the woman who delivers the mail. What other vendors do you have in security? Delivery folks. The delivery man or woman who leans on the desk of one of the employees and won't leave the person alone. We are responsible for making sure that doesn't happen. And if we have knowledge that it's happening and we don't do anything about that, there may be liability for the organization. Coworkers, which is probably what we see most often. Coworkers generally can't commit quid pro quo harassment. That is generally between a supervisor and a subordinate. But the hostile work environment, all the time. Can you give me, now that you've heard some examples that you personally have seen, either in this employment or elsewhere, personally seen, of someone, a coworker, doing things that might be regarded as sexual harassment against a coworker?
Off-color jokes?
Off-color jokes. Off-color jokes and comments. Touching inappropriately. Touching is huge. This is a touchy-feely environment, I guess, here at Hopkins. I can't tell you the number of people who say, I just like to hug. I just want to let people know that I'm warm and friendly. I was just giving him a little back rub. No. Keep your hands to yourself. It is possible to hug someone with the tone of your voice. You can express warmth and affection with a smile. Do not touch. Again, the person with whom you are exchanging this hug or this joke or this banter is giving as good as he or she is getting today. Tomorrow, they're mad at you. And it will come back to haunt you. And you will sit there tell me, well, she wanted it, and since you're all guys, or he thought it was funny, because remember Joseph Ancala, who now is a very wealthy man, the guys got fired off the oil rig. He was okay with that type of language. I was just showing him some pictures I had off the internet. Or I'm sitting on the internet and I'm forwarding pornographic images. Today, that's your best friend. Tomorrow, it's not. And it may come back to haunt you. Yes?
There's something else, too. You can have an individual that you speak to, male or female, it all depends.
Yep.
In this case, me being a male, it would be a female, vice versa, depending on the person. They speak, this is a certain way that they look at you, smile, and this and that, and then when they walk off, they stop and turn around to see if you're paying attention to them. And, if you're looking, and they turn around and look, then you get the other little smile, then their step changes. They start to move a little different because they know they got your attention. So that's something else that could be construed as that as well.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know if that may be inappropriate.
Well, if you're paying attention.
If
and
you're paying attention.
And you have the signal. They're looking for a signal. So if you okay that, in which they're doing, And therefore, now you're reciprocating this action here,
And-
which constitutes a problem in the workplace.
And that's a very good dilemma for people. What is it that you do when people are sending out those signals to you? Because this sexual harassment often goes both ways, and it puts you in sort of a predicament if someone is behaving inappropriately toward you or in a suggestive but not overtly sexual manner. What is it you're supposed to do?
There's a couple of things a person can do. You can, when they turn around and look, just because you may be looking that way, you can shake your head no, or you can do your fingers like that. That's a cutoff for them.
Yep. Or, if it continues, take it to a supervisor. It is better to be safe than sorry. Sometimes people live in an environment in their home or community where conduct like that is not regarded as inappropriate, and sometimes it's a learning curve. You may be doing that person the best favor anyone has ever done for her to have a supervisor say behavior and conduct and those subtle, suggestive, sexually provocative manners are not appropriate in the workplace, and it will hold you back. You cannot behave like that in the workplace because your actions may be misread, and they at a minimum are not professional. So it is a tightrope because it's awkward to say something to someone who hasn't said anything overt. You're reading into their body language, but you know it when you see it. So having the comfort level of speaking with your supervisor about the situation, again, better to be safe than sorry. Any other questions? Because that's a very challenging situation, and one I'm sure many of you see quite often. Anything else? Intent versus impact. It does not matter what you intended. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to be offensive. Doesn't matter. What only matters is how it's received, as long as it's received by what we call a reasonable person standard. For example, if I touched you on the shoulder, and then you file a sexual harassment complaint against me because I did make physical contact by putting a hand on your shoulder. Most reasonable people would say that was not sexual in nature, that was not inappropriate. So I can't be totally unreasonable about even a light touch. But intent does not matter. Another one of my real life stories that you think, oh my goodness, people really do this. There was a corporate client, and several of the women in the operation reported that a male, he was working on some type of IT department, and people had to take documents to him. And every time a woman walked into his office, he would stare at her chest. And not only would he stare at her chest, he would ask her, "What brand brassiere are you wearing?" Well, the women thought, this guy is weird. Talk about stunningly inappropriate in the workplace. Can any of you even imagine walking up to a woman and asking that question with the expectation you would still have your teeth? Can you imagine? So I started an investigation, and this one I'm thinking, well, this is a slam dunk. And I said, well, what? I know you didn't say this. That's actually how I started the investigation. And he said, oh, yes, I did. Sort of matter of fact. I said, well, what would possess you to think you could say that in a workplace? Not just to one woman, but to multiple women. And I guess he was about 60, 65-year-old, very distinguished looking gentleman. And he said, oh no, I ask that all the time. I said, why? Why would you ask that? He said, well, you know, before I worked for this company, I worked for the Maidenform Bra Company. And my job was a designer of women's brasiers. So I'm looking at women, thinking about my prior job. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. So I go back and I look at his application. He'd been with this company for like 20 years. So I plow through his personnel file, and where did he work? Maidenform. He was actually a designer of brasiers. But it didn't matter. It did not matter that he didn't intend it as a sexual question at all. Didn't matter. It was inappropriate, and the people who were offended by his question and his leering were reasonable. So it doesn't matter how you intend it. Is it a joke, or did I work for this company before? It's absolutely how it's received. Our duty, the duty of Hopkins, under the law and under our policy, is to make sure we communicate what our policy is. And that's part of why I'm standing here today, to make sure everyone is really clear what sexual harassment is and what is your responsibility as an employer, and for those of you who are supervisors, as a supervisor. The policy must be communicated to all employees, and it is in our employee handbook. We are in the process of developing an online training video. So rather than me going to 1,000 different departments all over the institution, everybody within Hopkins will be required to view a sexual harassment training video. We have to ensure that the complaint process actually works. So if an individual, male or female, makes an allegation of sexual harassment, our office has to investigate it thoroughly and promptly. And we must prevent, stop, and correct harassment anytime it occurs. If you are the victim of harassment in the workplace, the first thing to do, if you feel comfortable, is let the harasser know that the behavior makes you uncomfortable. The situation that you described about the woman who was making the suggestive mannerisms toward you, if you feel comfortable, let her know directly. It is the polite thing to do if you feel comfortable, because everything doesn't have to become a major investigation. If a simple, I really don't think that's appropriate in the workplace, or I wish you would stop that, please, would suffice. If you don't feel comfortable confronting the harasser, or if the harasser is your supervisor, then please feel comfortable to come to our office, your supervisor, or your HR consultant. If you become aware of sexual harassment in the workplace, you have now put the institution on notice. So we won't be able to say, if we get hauled into court, we didn't know. Most of you are in supervisory roles, and as such, your knowledge is what it's called imputed to the employer. And as a supervisor, you see it, that means the institution saw it. And you could be disciplined if you don't bring it to the attention of higher management or bring it to the attention of the HR department. It is a huge responsibility. And for those of you, particularly in security, you're out and about all the time, so you have more of a chance of seeing something probably than I would sitting in my office. Everyone is responsible for assuring that Hopkins is an inclusive work environment free of discrimination and harassment. Your voice will make a difference. So please feel free to speak up. Any questions of me, either now or after this session, don't hesitate to contact my office. If you have a situation within your department or within your shift or within your group and you're not sure whether it's harassment, but it sounds like something even a little bit that I talked about today, better to be safe than sorry. Go up your chain of command, bringing it to someone's attention. Any questions? Well, I thank you. Thank you for your attention. Okay. Thank you. Now, there is an evaluation form. If